Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast, where we explore the theory and practice of design. Hosted by me, Dani, and
me, Peter. Recording in progress. Well done for finding the record button on Zoom, Dani.
We have taken too long of a break, Peter.
We have.
So what shall we talk about today?
Well, I think let's talk about this thing called situation optimizing. Situation optimizing. Just go with me, please, because it's the first one and it's the new year. Let me ask you first, without you asking me back. Situation optimizing. What do you mean by situation optimizing?
Right. So it being a new year and all, I'll try to form some new habits and answer the questions as you ask them.
We'll see how that goes.
So situation optimizing, again, this is a concept that emerged in my research when I was studying design thinkers. And in the literature of human-centered design and design thinking, they talk a lot about optimism and how you can't really create solutions. You can't really design anything in a pessimistic mindset. So I included it in part of my research. And what I found when I was studying design thinkers is that there is an element of optimism that show up in the way that design thinkers work. And it's not an optimism of like seeing the world through rosy colored glasses. And, I think there's a lot of negative connotation that comes along with optimism. For design thinkers, optimism is really about understanding all the constraints, the pain points, and then still believing that there is a better way. Like, these are the constraints, these are the pain points. This is why this is not the best situation it could be. However, we can make it better. And it's not even knowing exactly how to make it better. It's that we can make it better. Now let's go figure out how to make it better.
Mm-hmm. Say that last bit again. So it's not even knowing
how to make it better, but that willingness to say, we can make this better. Now let's go figure out how to make it better.
I do like that. I'll come back to that specific point. So my the situation optimal. I think before you started to share your framework, the design thinkers profile with me, I hadn't, I guess, explicitly articulated this as part of design mindset or design thinking mindset or design thinking process. But when you started to talk to me about it, and now as you really clearly define it, I guess it's probably one of the reasons that I've ended up doing the work that I do. I remember saying to a colleague a few years ago now that we were just having a bit of a side conversation in a quiet moment of a workshop that somebody else was running, and we kind of both chatted to each other and almost confessed that realized that we must be optimists. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting in the workshop working for the company that we were working for. Because in the face of it, during the workshop, as a lot of ideas were explored and things were mapped out, it seems almost impossible to, almost overwhelmingly challenging to do the change that we were trying to make. Yeah, so I think it's for me anyway. I guess even though sometimes I can maybe sound or seem a little pessimistic, there's deep down a level of optimism or hope that things can be better, and I suppose that's why I choose to do the work that I do. Situation optimizing. Yeah, I guess it's up until your description of it and your terms, I'd always thought about, well, it's just there's got to be a better way to do a lot of things. and maybe another way to term that or talk about that is not accepting that the kind of the existing situation is the way it has to be.
The distinction to make there, though, is absolutely right. Like Herbert Simon, who's he's an American, let's see, he's a psychologist, a sociologist, he studied a lot of interesting topics, and he's one of the main founding theorists of design work. And he said the work of designers is to take an existing situation and transform it into a better one. And that statement has stuck with me, and it informs a lot of my views on design. And I think the caveat and the thing we have to remember is it's not saying that a better way is possible and being ignorant about the challenges, right? But it's facing into like, this is hard because X, Y, Z. This is a challenge because money, budget, time, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I still believe that we can do this better working within the constraints that we're working in.
Yeah, I think that, again, going back to your point about rose-tinted glasses and thinking about taking an optimistic approach to things. Yeah, sometimes maybe that can be misinterpreted as you're kind of naive and innocent and aren't aware of the constraints or all the reasons that something can happen. But yeah, for me, it boils down to a choice between choosing to accept that it can happen, it cannot happen, or choosing the other option, I guess, which is that maybe it can happen, focusing on the possibilities rather than all the reasons something can happen. Is that the same thing?
I know we like to give examples to kind of solidify some of the things that we talk about conceptually. So one of my research participants, her work was with cancer patients, and specifically she was looking at how do we improve the care of cancer patients to support better health outcomes. She talked about situation optimizing as when she saw her profile and she talked about it as, well, I see this as my superpower. Were her words. And when I asked her to explain, she said, well, most of the people I work with end up dying. And I still show up to work every day because I think that there are things we can do to keep fewer people from dying. And I feel like that is probably in terms of an example of what a situation optimist is, right? Because she's not ignorant or in denial, or she doesn't have this like savior complex, right? Like, I'm coming in and no more cancer deaths. Like, she's fully aware of the statistics, the reality, the pain, all of that. But she still shows up to work and goes, okay, how can we keep one person from dying today kind of attitude.
Wow. Yeah.
It also makes our work seem very...
Yes. Well, it puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
I'd like to... I like that story, and that's a really good concrete example of... and we touched on this a couple of episodes ago about, a mindset, and a mindset can often be a choice. So I think that's a really good example of a concrete example of a mindset choice. Can I come back to just ask you, so that you mentioned a quote there? Who was the person you mentioned? I don't think I've heard of that person before. Simon or Simone?
Oh, Herbert Simon.
Herbert Simon. And what it sounded really similar to a quote I've heard before from a person called Martin Niemeyer, in response to or I guess, again, a choice for everybody to make about who is a designer. And Martin Niemeyer, because there's lots of different definitions of who a designer is or who a designer might be or can be, but I really like this one, which is someone who can change an existing situation into a preferred one. So that sounds really similar to Herbert Simon. That was his definition of design, was changing an existing situation, or taking an existing situation and transforming it into a better way or a better one.
Yeah. Well, he described that as the work of designers is to
Okay.
transform an existing situation into a better one.
And then both of those remind me of Buckminster Fuller. I'm going to do our first Google search. Buckminster Fuller quotes. He was a designer engineer in America. For listeners who haven't heard him before, what did he say? Something like the best way to create the future is to design it. Is that right? Do you know that one? Buckminster Fuller.
Mm-mm.
Quotes. All right. I better Google it, and even Google will probably give us a mangled version of it. Well, this isn't the one I was thinking of, but he says you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. That's that is that an example of a situation optimizing mindset? Sorry, I've taken us off on a on a quotation detour.
So let's try to come back on topic. So we were talking about situation optimizing. We started out with defining what it is, and how it's a little bit different from just optimization or optimism.
Optimism, yeah. Different blind, or shall I call it blind optimism? Which so this definitely maybe kind of hard-minded optimism, because it's in full awareness and acknowledgement of all the constraints and potential obstacles in the way to create a better situation. But it's like your example, it's a choice to make about how is it a choice to make about how you see things, a choice on the perspective you take on everything. What are some ways that because I guess even if you're I imagine that you're the person working in the cancer ward won't necessarily always be in every moment and every day in all parts of their life be situation optimizing. What are some ways that we can, I guess, step into that way of thinking or doing, or switches that we can, switch in our minds to adopt that mindset? Even temporarily.
So I think just in general, for us to start kind of thinking and imagining beyond the current situation, we know from psychological research that things like gratitude journaling can improve our optimism. And I know even, with situation optimizing, we're not trying to just be blind optimists, but strengthening that optimist muscle can help us be better at situation optimizing. Then simple exercises, as you've heard of the and but exercise, right? Like where somebody presents an idea and you go but, and then come up with all the ways it won't work, and then you kind of force yourself to use and instead of but. So that's another exercise that you can do to kind of keep your mind open about, okay, this is the situation now, but how do we move forward? Is there a way to move forward?
Yeah, I like that. A variation on that exercise or game that you can play by yourself or others is saying yes instead of no.
Yes.
Or yes and instead of no but. Nice. So yes, in practical terms, if you find yourself kind of going down that spiral either by yourself or with somebody else, then that game of yes and instead of no but, that's cool.
The other one comes from Martin Sengelman, who is like coined the father of positive psychology. And he talks about this exercise, the ABCDE model. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Yeah. So that's another one when when people take the design thinker profile assessment and they score low on the situation optimizing element, that's one that I recommend. And it's basically A is around the adversity, right? So what's the problem? And then you ask yourself, well, what's your belief about it? What are you telling yourself about it? What are the consequences of those behaviors? Is C, and then what's some other alternative views that you can bring into that view that can disrupt that thinking, particularly evidence that you can bring in, and then how does that evidence impact or affect your viewpoint? I can put a link to one of his exercises in our show notes, but that's also a good strategy if you're finding yourself really not able to see beyond all of the problems or challenges, that you can kind of start to lift your mindset.
I do like the sound of that, and we'll definitely put a link in the show notes. Just give us so A was for...
A is for adversity, B is for belief, C is for consequence, D is for disruptive, and then E is for effects.
I like that. That sounds like something, again, you could do it by yourself, but actually I can picture it in my mind being a potentially really powerful, helpful way to, when you're working with others, maybe you've come to a bit of a roadblock or an obstacle in a team conversation or a workshop or any piece of work, then you could kind of systematically work through that with a group.
Absolutely, you can work through that in a group, and I've used that exercise with groups when there's kind of a stuck point and everything you're hearing is negative, and it feels like we're just going down this spiral of not being able to get unstuck in the current state. Because, if you think about situation optimizing, it's really looking at the situation and really going, what am I not seeing here that I need to be seeing? How am I going to move myself beyond this? So situation optimizing is really about moving yourself from where you are to a better state while understanding the constraints you're working within.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just, so it's well understanding those constraints. We're coming, I guess this is a point where we're reinforcing or you're reinforcing, and it's really sparking my mind around, it's not this blind naive optimism. There's an acceptance of the constraints and of the current situation and of the potential problems, but at the same time choosing to believe that there's a way forward, so that there's a different, a better situation on the other side of the obstacles or the work.
Yep.
Nice. You when you were talking about the Martin Seligman exercise, probably a bias because the book's sitting in front of me. I got for Christmas. I got given a classic book. It's De Bono's 6 Thinking Hats.
Yep.
Do you have a perspective on the 6 Thinking Hats, Dani?
I've got lots of perspectives on that.
Yeah. Maybe the reason it sprung to my mind, and I'm working my way through the book because I've really explored it in a lot of detail. I've heard about it a lot, but certainly in the 6 Thinking Hats model, again, we'll put a link in the show notes so people can explore it themselves. But there's a black hat that people are invited to metaphorically or sometimes literally put on, which is all about thinking cautiously and carefully, which is perhaps the kind of opposite maybe of our situation optimizing. But there's also, there's a yellow hat which is about being positive and speculative, and perhaps that's
So that brings up
Right.
that actually brings up an interesting point as well. So when I do talk about situation optimizing, I tend to talk about it in the positive angle, and that's because most of the work I do in organizations, what tends to come up is a lot of pessimism about something. But situation optimizing actually is about balancing optimism and pessimism.
Okay.
Because sometimes what happens is if people are, if I'm working with a team and they're too optimistic about a situation, then we also use situation optimizing to help bring light into what could go wrong. And that's where that concept of like a pre-mortem comes into place, right? Like, and getting people to, so I think that's where that black hat is quite useful. So at least in my experience, and maybe that's just the nature of the organizations I work in, the problem generally tends to be too much pessimism and not being able to see beyond what's happening. But the opposite could equally be true. But the concept of, or the capability of situation optimizing is really about balancing optimism and pessimism to come to a middle space.
Yeah, okay. It's a kind of another layer to it for me then. So it's not, I guess, you mentioned this right at the beginning, actually. It's this, I think the word optimism, ironically, is that ironically? Perhaps optimism being a positive word does have negative connotations for probably all of us, but some of us more than others. And it can conjure up images of this not balancing the kind of what's realistic, the ideal potential situation. What when and what you were just talking about made me wonder about situation optimizing. I suppose the clue's in the name, but I was wondering, what it is that you focus on when you are optimizing the situation. I guess it could be like tiny macro parts of your life, or it could be, tiny macro is the wrong, tiny nano micro moments in your life, or it could be huge, big, kind of wicked problems, systemic issues.
It's the pain point, right? For me, when I think about design work, it's actually about alleviating pain points. So when we think about situation optimizing, I guess I could have called it pain point optimizing, but that sort of sounds like I'm trying to make it more painful.
Could do, yeah.
But it's about, understanding that pain point and how do we alleviate that pain? And that's the work of design, right? We understand the pain point, and then we try to figure out, well, what's going to relieve that pain. And that can apply to our personal life, our professional life, whatever industry, like that. It has a universal application.
Yeah, I can see that. And then, sorry, my slow, especially slow New Year brain is starting to get somewhere now. Catching up with you. So if we're alleviating pain points, that situation optimizing, that's where the balance comes in. And it's actually making me think of our good old desirable, feasible, viable. We're looking for the balance of those three things that results in a less, either a completely pain-free point, or maybe an enjoyable point instead of a pain point, or at the very least a less painful point in somebody's life experience, etc.
I think that less bit is also important, right? Because I think sometimes we get so hung up on the perfect solution that, and this is where this idea of optimizing also comes in, right? Like, even if we make a problem a little bit better, it's still a win. But I think oftentimes we get so hung up on making the solution so perfect that we almost never address the problem because we're too busy trying to make the solution perfect. And we don't realize, actually, if we just do this little bit now, it'll make the pain a lot less. And now we're coming back to iteration. But this is how situation optimizing shows up in these decision making points throughout the problem solving process.
Okay. Yeah, we are coming back to iteration, and also something else that's jumped into my mind, because what did jump into my mind is kind of have the idea of having a single question. If you can boil it down to a single question that you can use to make decisions in all circumstances. And this is listening to the story of, it was one of the British Olympic rowing teams, and they were training really hard but not really making progress with any of their times or their races, and they got a new coach, and he helped them simplify everything they were doing by getting them to about what they were doing as individual athletes and also what they were doing as a team. And every single decision they made, the benchmark, if you like, of that decision was, will this make the boat go faster? And that seems to play into this idea of situation optimizing, because even a tiny if the answer to that question was yes, even a tiny bit, then that is optimizing something. If the answer to that question was either no, or it's actually going to make the boat go slower, then that's not optimizing, or it's not going to help optimize the situation anyway. So his answer, the coach's answer, answer to or guidance to the team was, if the answer is no, then stop doing it. If the answer is yes, then keep doing it and maybe do more of it. I guess that's an example of situation optimizing, and a whole. I thought I was really genius to be able to boil things down to a single question, really simple, not confusing. And for individual athletes, when they're, I guess they are designing as they're going along. Taking Marty Neumeyer and Herbert Simon's definitions, they're changing the existing situation. Our boat isn't going fast enough into a preferred one. Our boat is going fast enough to win medals. But they used it for the athlete was describing. The athlete describes, what time to go to bed, how much sleep to get, what to eat, what equipment to buy on an individual basis. And obviously, when it came to the whole crew, what techniques to keep going with that worked, what techniques to discard because they weren't working. Okay, cool. So that's helped me kind of solidify an example of situation optimizing. Nice. Any other? Maybe finding a way to to come up with one, two, or maybe three questions in whatever situation you're in that will help you understand whether something's going to help you optimize or not. Any other kind of practical things that we can do to help us?
So when you say questions to ask ourselves, you mean when we're facing into, like, how do we know if we're situation optimized?
I was trying to, articulate what it is that will this make the boat go faster? What is that doing? Kind of distilling things down into, what is the situation?
So I think some of the questions to ask is, do I or do we see a better way forward? And if the answer is yes, then, you lean into what that better way forward is. If the answer is no, then I think the question to ask is, what am I missing? What haven't I considered? And that's where especially that ABCDE exercise can be very useful if the answer to that is no. So
we've talked about the definition of situation optimizing, and you've definitely helped me kind of understand that the next kind of layers of detail. And like I said at the beginning, I think it's something that I guess I'm optimistic. I must be optimistic, but this is helping crystallize. And we've talked about some examples of people being situation optimizers, rowing, and in contrast, a totally different world of looking after cancer patients. We've got some practical tools. Why is situation optimizing so important? Why is it important that we adopt this mindset?
So I think I'm going to borrow from one of the the foundational scholars of this topic, Charles Owen. He talked about this idea of tempered optimism, and his view was that you cannot create or design or solve a problem in a negative mood. And the way that I saw that come up in my research is, if you don't believe a better way is forward, you're never going to move forward. So situation optimizing is important, because without it, we're not really going to design better solutions. We're not really going to create better outcomes. And we're just going to keep living in the same pain points that we are in current state.
So we need to, Charles Owen, so his tempered optimism, and his insight is that we can't design in a negative mood. So that means that he's saying that we need to believe that there is a better future ahead of us. Okay.
And we see this, right? It's like, if you don't believe in what you're doing, you don't fight for it. If you don't believe in what you're doing, then the first difficult obstacle you come up against, you're likely to go, I can't be bothered. And if you think about the thing you've really worked hard to achieve, there's a sense of belief that is driving you. And that's kind of what my research participant, the one that works with cancer patients, said, right? Like, I show up every day because I think we can do a lot more to make outcomes for cancer patients better. And I loved how she classified it as a superpower, because I do believe it's a superpower, because it's the thing that gets us out of bed. It's the thing that, when it's the 12th hour of the workday and you're like, I'm going to keep at this. We see it in athletes, right? That just put in all this sweat, blood, and tears into something. And again, I come back to, it's not blindly going out there and doing it. It's understanding what you're up against, what the challenges are, and trying to figure out, how do we maneuver around the challenges?
Yeah, I like the idea of a superpower. What just heaps of stuff like kind of firing off my brain at the moment, all sorts of links to different ideas that I think relate to this. One of them is, so going back to Charles Owen's can't design in a negative mood, is probably either the same as or very similar to you can't be creative when you're in a fear state, because those two states of mind, I'll use those terms as a layperson, but you can't think both creatively and be in absolute fear at the same time, because they're happening in two different parts of your brain or brain systems. So thinking creatively all happens in your prefrontal cortex, and being in a fear state comes from your lizard brain, your amygdala. And I understand that those two things work kind of like an on-off switch. They both can't be either on or off at the same time. If one is on, the other's off. Yeah. So I'll come back to that, because I've got a question for you. And again, it comes to practical things. But the other thing, that kind of sense of belief and having a superpower, and just making, what brings to mind for me is making progress. Even tiny amounts of progress have been shown to be psychologically important. And actually, the research done by a Harvard business psychologist, Teresa Amabile, I think her name is, great book called The Progress Principle. She researched lots of organizations across the whole world, and had thousands of people record work diaries. And her area of interest was what motivates people at work. And as part of the story she tells in her book, she got managers to list, rank 10 items or 10 things, 10 factors that managers believe motivate people at work. And the managers had, and this research was 10 or 15 years ago, but the managers had, I think, reward at the top, recognition, number 2, number 3 was something else. And then what she discovered from her research was almost the opposite, in that the number one motivating factor is actually intrinsic, and it's making progress, and specifically making progress in meaningful work, and making it doesn't the progress didn't have to be a great big leap forward. It didn't need to be a breakthrough idea. It just needed to be moving towards making small steps towards a big goal. So maybe this isn't specific. Well, it's not specifically situation optimizing, but it is maybe like the kind of recognizing that, and then just recognizing that you are making small amounts of progress towards a big goal can be like maybe the psychological flywheel or starter motor that gets you kicked into adopting an overall situation optimizing mindset.
Absolutely. There's a lot of research behind, starting small. Like if you're looking at doing something like, starting a new exercise routine, even just a small action of like Googling what types of exercises there to do, because it helps build momentum, right? And I think we even talk about this in our when we had our reflection episode on how we created the Design Thinker podcast. Like the idea of creating a podcast was absolutely overwhelming, and then we kind of came back to, okay, what's one thing we can do? And then we did that one thing, and then it was almost like an investment, right? Well, we've done the one thing and it feels silly to stop there. So what's the next thing we can do? So there's a lot of brain science behind why that works. And I think there is a link to situation optimizing. And this is why, like, I use activities like the ABCD exercise, because it's just a simple way go, you know what, maybe this isn't a pain point that we're going to solve for, but at least try to find out why. And then in going through that exercise, it might still be, hey, this is not the pain point we want to go after, but generally, because you've put in a little bit of work, you start to see more possibilities.
Yeah. So I think what we're saying is it's almost answering the question I was going to come back to, which was just going back to Charles Owen and kind of, can't design in a negative mood. And, I guess our job is being aware enough to realize when we, either individually or perhaps more often when a team has a general negative mood, first of all, being aware of that, then recognizing it, then I guess acknowledging it, but then how to get ourselves into a positive mood. It made me think of my picture-based mind was picturing, and Dani can see me. We don't do a YouTube podcast, so you guys can, but I've occasionally been told to smile a little. It might not happen, or cheer up, or blatantly they've got a bit of a resting grumpy face. To alleviate that, I'll sometimes, and I read this somewhere, you put a pencil in your mouth. Because if you smile, you basically, if you get your face to smile, then it lifts your mood. For maybe Dani can tell us why, but to kind of short circuit that, you can put a pencil across the way, not down your throat, between your teeth. I'll describe what I'm doing for listeners. So take an ordinary pencil or a pen, hold the sharp
horizontally
end, or sharp end between your one thumb and forefinger, and hold the other end of the pencil between the others. Hold your pencil horizontally, and then place it between your teeth. I won't do it because so that you sound like this, and you'll find that it forces your face to have a smile in it. And I have been known to do that to make myself feel slightly happier. It's not the cure for long-term unhappiness, but it will definitely give you a little bit of a boost in mood. And maybe what I was looking for, my mind was looking for, what are the hacks, if you like, or the shortcuts, or the things that can move us as individuals or teams from that state of not necessarily even despair, just kind of neutrality, to just that tiny bit of optimism that can get you into the positive mood that will help you start designing something. But I think we kind of talked about some of those things there. Just finding something, a small thing to move forwards with, if you pay attention to it, can then turn into well, another small thing and another small thing, and until you know it, you've done lots of small things, and it turns into this kind of snowball.
And I think like a question that I always ask myself, when I'm in a crap mood, or I feel like I just see something one way, I try to pause and ask myself, like, what am I not seeing here? What am I missing?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just another way to get to kind of short circuit your brain to go, I'm human. There's probably something I'm not understanding. And this is also where, the power of other people can come into place, right? Like, and having people in your life, in your circle, that see things differently than you is very important, because this is where you can go to them and say, this is the situation and this is how I see it, and I can't see anything beyond it. Like, is it me? So just, and sometimes you ask yourself that question, and you'll start to answer yourself too. But it's just that, our brains are kind of going down this tunnel vision kind of effect, and pausing to ask yourself that question can also be effective. And if it's not, then that's when you can engage other people as well. The other thing I wanted to point out is that, naturally as humans, we have tendencies, right? So some of us are more optimistic than others. Some of us have a pessimistic viewpoint. Some of us, I've been told I smile too much. So maybe I need to pass on some of my smiling to you.
We can do swapsies.
And do swapsies. And interestingly, like when you talked about that, like, I don't often know I'm smiling. So when people tell me I smile a lot, like it's kind of like just the way my face is, but I'm going off on a tangent. But I say that to say that, like, we all have different tendencies and different ways that we see the world. And that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with being pessimistic or having a pessimistic or skeptical view about things. But it's being aware that that is your lean, and going, okay, but I need to be able to see beyond it. Because what I don't want is to people to think, oh, everybody's got to be an optimist. It's kind of like, everybody's got to be an extrovert thing. Like, no, we've got to recognize people for who they are and what that viewpoint brings to the table.
Nice.
And that brings us to, so Seligman's work was really about, his book, Learned Optimism, was really about that. Optimism can be what they call state-like or trait-like. So trait-like is more like, this is part of your personality, who you are. State-like is a learned behavior. And that can shift. And that's where learned optimism comes from, right? So he says optimism is both state-like and trait-like.
Yeah.
We have a naturally tendency to be either optimistic or pessimistic, but we can learn to be optimistic. And same things apply to, like, you might know some introverts that in certain situations, they can be very extroverted. That's not their natural state. We do as humans, we have traits, but we can move beyond them.
I thought that my takeaway was going to be that your brilliant question, what am I not seeing here? But to give the game away for the end of the episode, I'm pretty sure that you just give me a new number one takeaway, and that's stay like, trait like. That's a really helpful, easy way to remember it. Really important to recognize that everyone's mix of state and traits for any particular behavior or mindset is going to be different. And then you bring to mind a really good point about a team. You shouldn't force people to pretend that they're anything they're not, I don't think, and especially when it comes to this sense of optimism or pessimism. Actually, it's really helpful to have people who see things differently to you, especially if you have a tendency towards optimism. Then, or if a team has a general tendency towards optimism, having a person on the team or a couple of people on the team who are going, "Oh, hang on a minute, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that?" Before you kind of get caught up in reality further down the road. Yeah, nice.
And that's why kind of, I think as much as I don't think this is happening anymore, but there was a time where there's a push to make everybody an extrovert. And as an extrovert myself, I would sit there and go, the world would be so loud.
Yes, it would. And as an introvert, that would be challenging, shall we say? Yeah, nice. Okay, so let's see. We've gone on quite a meandering journey this episode, Dani.
We have.
Is there anything we've not touched on from a situation optimizing idea?
I think that brings us to the end today.
Okay.
So I want to ask you, because I haven't asked you any questions today.
Wow, have you not?
No.
I've been practicing my interviewing skills then. I hadn't realized that. Okay, go on, ask me something.
Now I was just going to ask you, what's one thing that you've learned? So I'll ask you two questions. What's one thing you've learned today that you didn't know before? Mm-hmm. And then two, what's your one takeaway today?
Okay, one thing I've learned that I didn't know before. Well, from a practical point of view, the Martin Seligman exercise, adversity, belief, consequence, disruption, and effect. That is something I'll try out as well. So I'm just looking through my notes that I take. I guess the Charles Owen can't design in a negative mood. Again, that's really similar to something I knew already about fear and creativity, and it's maybe the same thing, but just using slightly different words. Certainly, I think is helpful for me as an individual and as a watching out for teams. Maybe just one last thing, maybe is that, you can have an optimistic mindset, but it could be state-like rather than trait-like, and that means that you can quite often be not in a positive mood, in a negative mood. So that in particular is a nice reminder that there's lots of ways to get out of that negative mood, and it is I guess you can get stuck in why can't I solve this problem, and that can take you further into or even understand this problem, or why can't I get started with this, and that can take you further into a negative mood. So just recognizing that and pausing and finding a way, finding the equivalent of the pencil between the teeth to move forwards. And maybe the takeaway then is state-like versus trait-like, or state-like and trait-like. That's mine. How about you? Have you learned anything new? Because I've been asking you lots of questions.
Actually, in your questioning, I did learn something new. And that is that when I talk about situation optimizing, I talk about it in terms of going from that negative space to the positive space. And I seldomly don't talk about going from that overly positive space to a less more practical space. So I think the thing that I've learned is I've got to balance how I talk about situation optimizing.
Mm-hmm. And then a takeaway, or was that your learning point and your takeaway?
No, my takeaway is I want to do a little bit of looking into why this pencil exercise works.
Okay. A good place to start might be a psychologist in the States who did research on posture.
Oh, Amy Cuddy?
Yeah, Amy Cuddy, or is it I think it might be I think
is she the one that did the Superman pose?
Yes.
I think that's Amy Cuddy.
It is Amy Cuddy, yes. Amy Cuddy, not the character in House.
No.
Who I've also been compared to in the past.
Well, it's better than me calling you Eeyore.
I could relate to House, not the pill popping or the permanent injury, just slightly curmudgeonly. All right, so research the pencil. Yeah, I'm keen to know where I got it from. Was it Amy Cuddy or was it somewhere else?
Yeah,
that's your takeaway. Nice.
Yeah, that's my takeaway. All right, I think that does it for us today.
Excellent. Thanks, Dani. It's a great chat, and I've learned lots.
I've enjoyed that as well. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in, and see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.